to welcome everyone. I appreciate you bearing with us through some of those beginning technical difficulties. But I hope we are all arriving now and getting settled in for this afternoon that we have together. My name is Leora Gupkin-Malikdom, and I am the director of California State University Bakersfield's Institute for Religion, Education, and Public Policy. And I'm delighted that we are here coming from our various spaces together on this Sunday afternoon. On behalf of the Institute, the Gandhi Alliance for Interfaith Harmony, and the Office of Student Life at Bakersfield College, I bid you welcome. Now, some of you have been asking, am I in the right place? So just a clarification, today's program is in two parts, right? So this webinar, we are all together and we'll introduce the idea of appreciative knowledge as an entry point to interfaith dialogue. I know we have students here from Bakersfield College, we have students here from CSUB. Your teachers have set up various ways that you are supposed to communicate with them about this program. But you'll hear a bit from me, from young professionals who take interfaith leadership's knowledge, skills, and abilities into their work and their engagement with the world. And then from three members of our community who will share from their personal experience. We will be using the Q&A function within Zoom for questions. So I know people have been using chat right now, but when we get to the part, if you have questions for the speakers, to please go ahead and submit those questions as they arise to the Q&A, and then I'll return when they're done speaking to help moderate those questions. At the conclusion of this webinar, you'll join in the smaller group conversations that were based on what you registered for, right? So those were the religion and racial justice, Am I my brother's keeper, spirituality, times of crisis and calamity. And Nikki has put all of those links into the chat for you just to be able to click on afterwards as we are wrapping up this webinar in about 45 minutes or so. All right, and with those, there's also excerpts from sacred texts that were pulled together by Camille Efranian of Bakersfield Interfaith, who facilitates a monthly interfaith text study and conversation, and you'll be hearing from him in a bit as well. Okay, so do we have our list of moderators slide up for us? All right, so before we launch into our speakers, I just want to say that there were a number of people who had to step up to make this program possible. Usually at this time of year, the Gandhi Interfaith Committee has a program for the last several years. It's been at CSU Bakersfield, and they invite some panelists and we all gather in the multi-purpose room and people ask questions afterwards, and it's wonderful. But of course, we weren't able to come to the multi-purpose room this year. And so we still wanted to use this time to have a program that really lifts up the diversity of our community. And the planning committee really wanted to host an opportunity for conversation. It just seems strange to have interfaith dialogue without giving you the opportunity to actually dialogue with one another. And so that required a lot of people willing to step up. So we're grateful to the faculty from Bakersfield College, from Cal State Bakersfield, and religious leaders in our community, Baha'i, Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, Jewish, Muslim, and Sikh, who volunteered to facilitate the conversations for part 2 of this program. Can you take us to the next slides, please? Okay, so I want to just introduce this idea of appreciative knowledge. At the Institute for Religion, Education, and Public Policy, we take as our mission promoting justice and peace in a religiously diverse world. And we recognize that while we live in an increasingly religiously diverse nation, our knowledge of that religious diversity, and especially how we can utilize our diverse perspectives for a common good, is somewhat lacking, right? There's room for us to grow. So one first step, one way to promote this is to take an interest in learning about and learning from people whose religious or secular beliefs and practices differ from one's own. And so I've brought up for you a definition of appreciative knowledge that comes from Eboo Patel, who founded and is president of Interfaith Youth Corps. It's a national organization that works with college campuses primarily across the country. And it says, appreciative knowledge is knowledge developed by actively seeking out the beautiful, the admirable, and the life-giving in others' traditions, rather than paying attention to the deficits, the programs, and the ugliness, or even just the facts of other traditions, right? So the idea, right, is to think about, I have beliefs and practices and values that motivate me and how I live out in the world. And they may be different from yours, right? We may have some similarities, we may have some differences. And to work together for the common good, to really come with a sense of interest and curiosity, right? To appreciate those differences so that we can work together. If you could take us to the next slide, please. So as I was preparing these opening remarks, I was reminded of a teaching I heard from the great rabbi of Jewish renewal movement, Zalman Schachter Shalomi, when he was awarded an honorary doctorate by the Unitarian Universalist Star King School for the Ministry back in 2012. It's when I was starting on my own ministry education. He was an innovator in what was then called ecumenical dialogue, and he believed that it could be a personal exchange of deep truths entered into with an openness to transforming one's own life. But in his talk, he recounted how often in his experience that was not exactly the case. And I'll paraphrase here. But basically that people would come to the table wanting to share what was the shiny apple of their own tradition, right? Those things that were the beautiful and the admirable, and compare it to the poop of others, right? Those things that are more difficult, the critical pieces in our traditions. And it really made me reflect on how much in our conversations of religion and politics today that we give in to this, what I'll call the apple poop model of conversation. And I'm just wondering, putting out the question of how much more productive might it be if we were interested in the apple, right? The beautiful, the admirable, and the life-giving that comes from others. So at this point, maybe with that question in mind, if John could pull up for us, we have a video, it's about 10 minutes, from young professionals who have taken this approach of appreciative knowledge, and they share a little bit about how that has informed their lives. As you all are noting, we are not getting sound on this. So bear with us for 1 minute and we will relaunch it. And if not, we'll just move on along.
an asset for this work to call people into the room who might not be able to be in that space for various reasons.
Developing an appreciative knowledge of other religions or faith traditions, I think, is challenging because of how, one, our education system is structured, and two, the nature of public discourse. In our education system, there are, or at least I was afforded many opportunities to learn about different religions. In high school, I took a world religions course. In college, I took a world religions course, and both touched on many of the basic tenets, fundamental tenets of the major world religions. Oftentimes, especially in a public high school, it's limited to the curriculum that's going to be assessed, right? And it's really easy to assess what's the name for God in Islam. That can show up on a multiple choice test, but developing appreciative knowledge is not something that's easily assessed in public schools.
When I first started in the interfaith movement, it was mostly about the dialogue. It was speaking with people from other religious or ethical traditions about what they believed, why they believed it. And that helped me to see, and it sounds simplistic to say it, but what I wasn't or what I didn't believe. I soon came to find, though, through dialogue and service projects too, that it was just as important to figure out what we had the same. And those collections of things that people believed helped me understand more about my own faith tradition, flesh it out a bit. It was easier for me to know through what others believed how I should answer specific questions, maybe about big issues like love or the environment or anything like that. It sharpened and refined my understanding of my own faith. And that hasn't stopped. The relationships that I maintain through the interfaith movement of people from all kinds of wild backgrounds have helped me understand myself more deeply and others more deeply as well, which is a very rewarding experience.
I began to get more of an appreciative knowledge of other traditions starting when I was a little kid. My family is Indian and we're also Muslim, so we kind of have different traditions that are kind of present in our regular life. And growing up, a lot of our close friends were Hindus. So we'd go to some of their events or go to some of their religious ceremonies, and I would always wonder why they were practicing certain things. And I really kind of was interested in learning more about the history behind these traditions and how that related to my identity, both as an American and as an Indian, and growing up in America as a Muslim. I noticed that our school had a South Asian club that was really big on campus. We put on this big show every year with singing and dancing, and both the Muslim and the Hindu students were really involved with this. But they didn't really interact in terms of their religious identity much. Like the Hindu and Muslim students associations didn't really run events together. And I knew that a lot of my friends wanted to kind of learn about each other's traditions, but they didn't know the right environment to do that. So by working with the Muslim students, the Hindu students, and the Interfaith Council, we put together an event called Shanti and Salam, which means peace in Sanskrit and Arabic, to kind of help us learn about each other's traditions. And it was kind of a closed environment where we had people all like in a safe space where we could discuss Islam and Hinduism and kind of learn from each other. And this event went off really well because this had never really been done before at our school. And it became such an important event that people really took a lot from, that it's been running every year since I left. And now it's like almost a staple of the programming between those two groups.
I think interfaith has helped me become a better communicator because, first of all, I have to know what I believe. And I have to know how to explain it in a way that other people will understand and won't misunderstand or put their own spin on it, which you can't always avoid, but by learning how to communicate my own ideas, I'm much better at being able to convey them in a way that others will understand. And as a result, it also gives me the empathy to say, okay, if I were sitting in someone else's shoes and they were trying to convey to me what they believe, how would I feel about it? How would I want someone to treat me? And so I think it's helped me become a better communicator because it's opened me up to different ideas. It's opened me up to a different world of experiences, and it's helped me see that we put all these labels on people and that we don't have to do that. And I'm inspired by that. And so it changes the way that I then enact in my own life. Social justice and humanitarian service and nonprofit work, because there are others who don't have the same beliefs who are doing as much, if not more. and that really influences me for the better.
I think the advice that I would give people is to take risks and to not let, assumptions or stereotypes get in the way of getting to know people and working with people. And I know that there are certain cultural communities and faith communities that it may seem like they have a lot of baggage or that they're difficult to work with. And it's hard sometimes to get past that pain or get past that struggle. But I think that, persistence is important and empathy is important.
I cultivated an appreciative knowledge of other traditions solely based on how I was brought up. A lot of my weekends were spent with families from other faith traditions, and particularly ones, for example, that were Muslim. I had a lot of families who were Ismaili Muslims, so that's a part of the Shia denomination, and they basically taught me how to pray salah or namaz, as we would call it in Urdu. We would have these giant feasts with them and see how, culturally speaking, we were very, very close. And sharing the culture, and more importantly, sharing the food, is how we built actually on the shared values of how the faith traditions could be completely different, but we had a common ground.
When I was just out of college, in my first year of rabbinical school, I helped found the Journal of Interreligious Dialogue, which is now the Journal of Interreligious Studies. It came forth as an idea between myself and another seminary student, Stephanie Varnon Hughes, who was at Union Theological Seminary. And we realized that even though we were young, and even though we were still very much in the process of our own religious and spiritual and ethical formations, we needed knowledge of other traditions, and we needed deeper knowledge of how our traditions interacted with others. We got to ask deep questions. So in some ways, thinking of the expression in Hebrew, livnot ulahibanot, we built, and in the process, we were built in our knowledge of other traditions.
Learning about other religions is definitely helpful in the medical field because as kind of part of life, you're going to be taking care of people that are from various different traditions. And a lot of times when people are sick or in kind of serious trouble, they turn to their religious community or their own faith to help them get through that. And having some kind of basic understanding of where they're coming from will really help you build a connection with that patient. And I've noticed this in Chicago. A lot of the communities that we serve at University of Chicago don't really trust the healthcare system much, but they definitely trust their local religious communities. And it's important for the hospital and the medical world to have partnerships with these community organizations to kind of improve the health of their communities too.
The ways that we celebrated the Seder, what we emphasized, the Haggadah that we read, they were all very specific to our family. And so I had one idea of what a Seder looked like. It wasn't until I actually got to college and then graduate school that I actually learned that there are many other ways of celebrating the Passover Seder. And the different ways of celebrating the Seder came from inviting other Jews outside of the humanist Jewish tradition to celebrate the Passover Seder with me, going to Seders hosted by other friends, and then also bringing in not just Christian neighbors, which was primarily who we celebrated the Seder with when I was a child, but also my Muslim friends who didn't come from any religious tradition at all, and hearing from their perspective what it meant to celebrate the Seder. I remember my brother was hosting a Seder just a few years ago, and we had all of his friends around the table, and one of his friends, who was an African-American woman who grew up in the South of the United States, talked about what the story of Exodus meant to her as a Christian from the historic Black church, what that story meant, how that inspired her community, how that was a fraught story, and how she and her community, at least in her church, told that story differently than we were telling the story as sort of Jews in the United States. And that helped me grow in my own understanding of my tradition. It allowed me to be self-reflective. Why was I telling the story of Exodus in the way that I was? What were my commitments to my tradition, to social justice, to engaging the religious other, to protecting the oppressed? And how is that similar or different to how other people told the story? How are these different details, right? The details, the sort of specific color that people give to the story from their own religious tradition, how did that enrich what I was understanding? And so that was an important experience to me.
So again, I certainly appreciate your patience as we've worked through some of these technical issues. You'll notice the chat is full of links for all of these videos if you want to go back afterwards and watch them again. I also was a little frustrated that happy there was closed captioning, that it was a little low on the screen. Hopefully it will look different viewing it on your own. I'm also hopeful that we will be able to add a captioning to this when we post it for viewing afterwards. But at this time, what I want to do is, the links, thank you for that, Kristen. So the links just went to panelists. Is it possible to put the links to everyone? And there they go. Thank you so much for that, Nikki. All right, so with that, let me introduce our first speaker. So Dr. Camille Afranian has lived in Bakersfield since 2012 when he moved with his wife and 3 children here and joined the Southern California Orthopedic Institute, where he practices hand and wrist surgery. Dr. Afranian's participation in interfaith meetings dates back to his time as a college student at University of California, Irvine. He participated and organized interfaith meetings as an undergraduate student there, and then subsequently in Boston, where he attended medical school, and in North Carolina, where he was assistant professor of surgery from 2007 to 2012. Since 2013, Dr. Afranian has participated in and co-organizes monthly and annual interfaith meetings in Bakersfield. A member of the Baha'i faith, he enjoys spiritual conversations with people from all backgrounds and is devoted to bringing about understanding, education, and dialogue to build unified communities. Welcome, Camille.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gupin. It's a pleasure to share some learnings on interfaith dialogue. In college, I was fortunate to co-organize and collaborate with many people of different faiths, conferences for religious and racial unity. And the great learnings from that experience carried on to life elsewhere and in Bakersfield. Since 2014 or so, or 2013, the group has met monthly, and the group studies writings from all faiths on relevant social and spiritual topics such as equality, love, justice for all, the nature of the human soul, developing spiritual perception, and refraining from judging others. It's a collegial and relaxed consultation. I realized one day the value of the interfaith dialogue that I hadn't perceived myself when someone attending those meetings said that we don't have the opportunity to speak about our faith or to not talk about it as if it's taboo at work or at school. She said that these meetings provide a safe space to share our inner thoughts, to teach and learn from others, at the same time forming deeper bonds. So dialogue for that person acted as a mirror for that person's soul to reflect and refine and fine tune that person's understanding, as it has been for me. One of the clergy who attend these meetings, I asked to give feedback as well. And she said, and I'll quote here, "It has been wonderful to meet people of different faiths and hear their love for peace and humanity. I also enjoy very much reading Holy Scripture writings with which I am unfamiliar. I think it is important to be able to articulate my own faith without diminishing anyone else's. I believe people of my faith can be guilty of trying to tell people of other faiths that we are right and they are wrong. I want to be an example that we are not all alike, that we're not all like that, and that many of us respect other beliefs, and I'm grateful for that opportunity." I guess what motivates me to participate in interfaith conversation is to work towards unity. You know, the reality is the world is divided along racial, religious, and national lines. And I think it's best to work together. And there's always more strength when we collaborate than when we're apart. As a child in a Baha'i home, I went through a curriculum to learn about all religions. So I saw the string of unity between all the faiths, but also appreciated the differences. I was inspired by the central teaching of Baha'u'llah that humanity is one, that we are all, quote, the fruits of one tree and the leaves of one branch. Baha'u'llah said, consort with the followers of all religions in a spirit of friendliness and fellowship, and to prefer other religionists before yourselves. So that was my task, is to prefer others before myself. So I hope that I'm providing a service to the community. If we can, oh great, we have the slide. I just wanted to share some current concepts and misconceptions about interfaith dialogue. Some people will say religions are competitors. People believe in a different God, and there are real differences. And our faith is true and all others are false. There's no need to learn about other religions. Interfaith dialogue is debate and can be nasty. Better not to talk about religion to avoid conflict. Interfaith dialogue will change your faith, so stay away. Next slide, please. The experience of the monthly interfaith meetings is quite different. Religions, as we have seen it, as I see it as well, is that that religions are not competitors, but they come at different times, locations, and are revealed in different languages to educate humanity. As you see on this slide, not one religion has come at one particular time. They've all come at different times. And it looks to me as if there's a continuum. The founders of these great faiths are like teachers in school. Should we look at our 1st and 12th grade teacher as competitors or as educators? The concept that all religions proceed from the same source merits serious contemplation by anyone engaged in dialogue. Can we go to the next slide, please? An example of this is the teaching to love all. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. A man should not hate any living creature. Let him be friendly and compassionate to all. Love your enemies, bless them that curse you. Hate is not conquered by hate. Hate is conquered by love. This is an eternal law. Do you love your creator? Love your fellow beings first. Let all mankind be thy sect. You were created to show love one to another and not perversity and rancor. Take pride not in love for yourselves, but in love for all mankind. When I viewed these, or anyone participating in interfaith dialogue, we see that common thread when we read these writings, but we also see some differences. Can we go to the next slide? So religions in their essence, which is those spiritual laws that we just looked at, are the same, but in practice, they're very different. The next slide, please. There are two aspects of religious laws. There are spiritual laws, such as love, truthfulness, service to others, and then the social laws. These are the manner of dress, the dietary laws, the manner of prayer, meditation. These are all different, and they've come at different times. Those who participate in interfaith dialogue develop the skill and ability to distinguish between these two laws, the spiritual and the social, and appreciate both the unity of religions and their diversity. I think herein lies the sort of the pearl of anything that I've seen in interfaith dialogue, is to see the similarity and to understand the differences. Can we go to the next slide? As I mentioned, some people believe that dialogue is like debate, but we view it as consultation. A conversation and consultation's purpose is to solve a problem, to look deeper rather than being superficial, understand ourselves and others more authentically. A debate's purpose is to win, to prove we are right and everyone else is wrong. In so doing, we humiliate our fellow human. And would that please the founder of our faith, who gave us the golden rule, for example, which is similar in every faith? Interfaith consultation has a different purpose, and it makes our thoughts clearer and refines our beliefs and understanding in the context of history. A Baha'i quotation which is helpful in this regard is, in terms of the importance of consultation, quote, "Consultation bestoweth greater awareness and transmuteth conjecture into certitude. We can understand more when we have many people in the dialogue, seeing, hearing different words, and we can then become more certain in our understanding." Next slide, please. The world is very diverse. We need to have more communication, not less. As you see in this map, the diversity profile of the world is rapidly changing. We are no longer separated by geographic lines. We need to have more communication. Suspicions and prejudices then give way to collaboration. We appreciate people not as a label, but as the soul that comes from God. Communication is necessary for life and function. If we do not have communication, then all life as we know it would end, a plant, a human. So we need, in the medical terms, for example, each cell to communicate with another cell with hormones so that the body can live. If we don't have communication, or if communication breaks down, then the greater body of humanity may fail. And the ability to use words is what distinguishes us as human beings compared to other beings. We can understand God through words. God reveals through words. And so we express our love through words and deeds. So in the brain, God has given humanity the two language centers, which are expressive, which is how we speak, and the receptive center, which is the ability to comprehend words. So why have we lost the art of conversation? Why have we sometimes had a hard time listening to others in any dialogue when it's not going our way? Perhaps it's a spiritual problem. Maybe we need to develop spiritual virtues, such as humility, that we don't know everything, patience for someone else's viewpoint, love for that person and their path, and perhaps compassion, and more importantly, fairness, in order to learn from others. Next slide, please. Interfaith dialogue does not need to change our faith, but it can certainly enrich it. And that dialogue and the bonds that are built are larger than the small parts. So hydrogen and oxygen can come together through sharing electrons. We see it at the atomic level, that sharing and bond formation gives life and something much greater than the smaller parts. But notice that hydrogen does not become oxygen and vice versa. In the same way, we can share our thoughts and express ourselves, and perhaps we can build something much bigger. Next slide, please. I'll just share a couple quotations that I found to be very helpful. Consider unity is necessary to existence. Love is the very cause of life. On the other hand, separation brings death. The law of attraction has brought together certain elements in the form of this beautiful flower. But when that attraction is withdrawn from the center, the flower will decompose, and as a flower cease to exist. Next slide. Perhaps we'll go to the next one. This is a slide from Dr. Leonard Swidler, who's a professor of religious studies and is known for interfaith dialogue. And he put together 10 principles to have conversation. One of the primary purposes of dialogue is to learn, to change, and to grow in perception and understanding. It's a two-sided project. It requires honesty, sincerity, and we must not compare our ideals with our partner's practice, but rather our ideals with other partners' ideals, and practice with practice. Each person must define themselves and also the interpretation that they bring. We shouldn't have any hard and fast assumptions as to where the points of disagreements are. And dialogue takes place between equals. So we should see each other as equals. There's a mutual trust. There must be at least minimally self-critical of both ourselves and our traditions in order for us to have dialogue. Each participant eventually must attempt to feel spiritually as opposed to just think through the intellectually. So when we engage in small group discussion this afternoon, the hope is to appreciate the realities of each faith and to learn from each other's perspective in a way that we can build bridges and bonds. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Camille. You've given us a lot to think about and to take forward into our conversations later this afternoon. So, but now I'd like to introduce Darius Riggins. Darius Riggins is Director of University Outreach and Recruitment at California State University, Bakersfield. He's worked for 24 years within the CSU system at 5 different campuses, but of course he likes Bakersfield best.
Of course.
Of course. So Mr. Riggins attended CSU Northridge, where he earned a BA in Pan-African Studies and an MA in Educational Psychology, and he's currently working on a doctorate in Educational Leadership from CSU Bakersfield. Mr. Riggins is also an ordained minister in the African Methodist Episcopal Church and is currently serving at Kane AME Church as on their ministerial staff. And he was kind enough to share a favorite scripture with us. 1 Timothy 5, verses 1 and 2, rebuke not an elder, but entreat him as a father, and the younger men as brethren, the elder woman as mothers, the younger as sisters, with all purity. So welcome, Darius.
Thank you, Dr. Leori. I first want to thank the organizers of this wonderful event for inviting me and for everyone that is on the call. First, let me say that I think it's very, very telling and interesting that we're talking about peace, we're talking about people getting along together, and we have an interesting dialogue between those that want to be the leaders of this country. I really want people to really emphasize and think about the benefits of us being able to try to be on one accord, to try to talk sensibly with each other, to try to find common ground, even though there may be a difference of opinion. Before I get into a story that I was asked to tell, I want to emphasize that I sincerely believe that it is important for us to be able to hold on to our values, hold on to those things that we think is good for us and for our lives. And if somebody else disagrees, or if somebody has a different sense of philosophy, that doesn't mean that we have to be angry with that person. That doesn't mean that I want to hurt you because we're different. That doesn't mean that I want to kill you because we're different. Difference is a good thing because we can learn from each other. And many times, sometimes you might be able to find something that somebody else believes in or knows about that you never ever considered. And then all of a sudden it changes your outlook. It changes your perspective. It broadens your horizon. So I want to say to everyone out there, peace. I love you as brothers and sisters. In fact, with that scripture that I just said, many times, once I get to know somebody, regardless of their cultural background, I like to engage them as brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so. That's just what I really believe how we should act. We should treat each other more as family than enemies or simply counterparts. So that being said, let me say this. When I was younger, of course, we all grow up, we all have been inundated with certain amount of information that our parents give us, or a certain cultural area, our neighborhood. And sometimes we don't get a chance to find out about someone else and their culture and their community and how they think and who they are and what certain things mean to them. And one of those areas that I didn't have a lot of information with or communication with or interaction with was the homosexual community. And because of that, whenever I saw members of that community engaged in hand-holding, say, or engaged in some other type of expression of love, when I'm 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, it looks odd. It looks different. It's something I've never experienced before. And so when I went to a university, and being exposed to not only that community, but all kinds of other cultures, I was being challenged in my thinking, challenged in what was sent to me. And so I had a particular framework of what I thought that community was all about. Well, there was a time where there was a lot of different activism happening on campus. I'm looking in the school newspaper, and one of the organizations that represented that community was a group by the name of LAGA, which stood for Lesbian and Gay Association. Okay, cool, no problem. But I saw that they were advertising a film called Stop the Church. So here I am, brought up in a traditional church type of environment. And so when I saw that, you know, my 17-year-old mind, without knowing anything about that community or what that movie was going to be all about, my mind said, hell no. So, you know, I went marching down to that particular event. I put on a black jacket that had Malcolm X on it, because even my own experience with Black consciousness and being young with that information, I was getting a brand new, fresh mode of knowledge. And so that jacket had a hood on it. I put the hood on, I got my Loke shades, and I went to the event. I stood in the background with my arms crossed like this, just ready for battle. And at the end of the event, they asked for questions and answers. I went straight to the front and started asking questions. And this interaction opened up my mind. I had no idea that there were people that felt that the church threatened their existence. And in my mind, I'm like, wait a minute, the church is about goodness. It's about helping people. It's about loving your neighbor. How could you think that the church wants to hurt you? It didn't even cross my mind, because I didn't have their perspective and thinking. It never even come into my mind that they would have that perspective. And through that interaction, something interesting happened. The next few days, people that saw me there, they were coming up to me and saying, hey, Darius, what's up? How you doing? And I didn't even know who they were, but they were now all of a sudden, they weren't threatened by me and I wasn't threatened by them, because we had some dialogue. We were able to get to know each other. We were able to appreciate each other's perspective in a way that allowed us to now have respect and cordiality and a sense of well-being about who that person was. And for me, I had to remember, Darius, this is another child of God. This is another person just like you, in terms of God loving them and God wanting them to have the best for their life. So even though we had a difference of opinion, a difference of cultural upbringing and expression, I certainly was not going to be one that was going to allow my mind to think that they were less than, or that I was better than them, because that was not the case at all. And so it was just one of those experiences where that brightened my spiritual development in terms of where I was in my life in relation to someone else who happened to think differently or philosophically, particularly when it came to religion and spirituality. So I would hope that in my walk as a Christian, that I can extend my hand to anyone, that I can love as Jesus loved, that I can give you a hug, that I can walk with you, talk with you, have a conversation with you without you feeling threatened by me and without me feeling threatened by you. So I just believe that is, at least for me, my walk and my belief wants me to have open arms. I don't want people to feel threatened by me. We might have a difference of opinion. We might have a difference of cultural expression. But at the end of the day, I hope we can find more things that we have in common and some things that we can try to work out and be on one accord with than to be on the opposite ends. And if there is an issue where we just simply have to agree to disagree, cool. But can we still leave that conversation with a handshake or a hug, or at least something that lets you know and let me know that even though we have a difference on this issue, you know what? You're not going to be threatened by me. I'm not going to take up arms against you. If anything, we just continue the dialogue, continue to try to work it out to where we can get some common ground. So that's my story. I thank you, Dr. Leora, for the opportunity. And I'm willing to engage in conversation with anyone on any issue, particularly when it comes to spirituality and religion. But thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Brother Darius. I would say it has been a pleasure getting to know you a bit as we've been putting this program together. And I'm very appreciative of what you just shared with the group. Thank you again.
Amen.
Amen. So I'd like to introduce our final speaker, Ellen Ijibor, pronouns her, hers. She is a second-year doctoral student in counseling psychology at New Mexico State University. Ms. Ijibor holds a BA in psychology with a minor in religious studies. Her current research interests include decolonization, social justice, advocacy, and how experiences of marginalization and oppression associated with sociocultural identities and their intersections affect mental health and well-being. Ms. Ijibor is an alumna of CSU Bakersfield, and she helped start the student interfaith club Common Ground. And so I'm delighted to at least virtually welcome her back to Bakersfield.
Thank you, Dr. Gupkin. I'm so excited to be here and to be around my Bakersfield family, even though it's not in person. So today, I'm just going to be really talking about what my experience has been with appreciative knowledge and interfaith encounter. So starting when I was really, really young, I was born in Nigeria and I was raised Catholic. And so my first interactions with other cultures or other religions was as a little kid. My best friend when I was young was a Muslim woman. And so my dad sat me down actually, because he grew up, even though he grew up Catholic, he grew up in a predominantly Muslim community. And he had me go through the Quran with him and we would do this together. And so that was kind of my first introduction to other people's religions and really the idea of appreciative knowledge, because he said, you know, you're interacting with someone who has a different religion than you. It's important for you to understand her culture, her beliefs, and the way she operates, and to integrate that into your life as well. Just because as long as you love that person, it's important to love all of them and to understand all of them. And so, and over the course of the years, I've had different experiences because I've moved around a lot. I've lived here in the US and also in the Netherlands. So I've been fortunate enough to interact with people of different cultures, different backgrounds. And that's what appreciative knowledge has kind of looked like for me in my life, is really interacting with people from different walks of lives, people that disagree with me, people that don't even value me, to be honest, just by virtue of being a Black woman, a Black queer woman. And that's kind of what appreciative knowledge has looked like. So my first introduction really to interfaith dialogue was in college at CSUB, and Professor Kathleen Hansen, I don't know if she's on here, she gave me the opportunity to attend an ILI conference. And that was the first time that I really consciously, as an adult, started to engage in interfaith dialogue and start to understand different cultures and see how this could be relevant in my life. And that experience is one that I will cherish forever because it really did shape the course of my life. And my decision to go into a counseling psychology program that was really situated in social justice. When I was at the conference, this was in 2017, that was when the first Muslim ban order came from Trump. And I remember everyone just getting up in arms, ready to go protest, ready to do something. And that was the first time that, for me, I understood what religious pluralism was, right? Coming together for the greater good and coming together to support communities. And I knew, okay, like I've always been one, like I care about people, but I never really stood in my power or stood in action. I just talked about it. And so that really changed the course of my life. So currently in my work as a doctoral student, I really do focus on communities that have been marginalized, specifically Black communities and Black women. That's where my research interest lies, especially Black queer women. And I use appreciative knowledge in the way I work as a clinician and in my research. So the first thing I'll talk about is decolonization. And so when I talk about decolonization, that can sound like a scary word to people, but it really just means getting people back to the root of their cultures. And so, given the history of Black bodies in America and indigenous bodies, our cultures have been ripped from us. And a big part of that culture was our spirituality. So, in my work with clients, especially clients of color, I tend to use a radical healing framework, which really embodies tapping back into your ancestral knowledge and your ancestral way of being and understanding the way spirituality has kind of shaped your life. Because in the Black community in America, even though their culture was ripped away from them by virtue of slavery, there's still a strong connection to spirituality, and that's mostly through the Black church. But you also see now people are starting to tap back into their African roots and African ancestral ways of healing. And so I really bring that into my practice and into my work with clients. And I always ask, what is the way you learned how to heal? How does your community heal? How do they understand your way of being? And so I really co-construct the space with them. And that's how I practice really integrating appreciative knowledge in every conversation I have, because I tell them, they're the experts of their own journeys. They're the experts of their bodies, of the way they interact with the world, of the way they understand the world. So I really let them educate me and let them tell me their stories. And I use that to guide the healing process. And spirituality for a lot of communities has been the way of healing, especially communities of color, the way you've gotten through trials and tribulations, through series of extensive oppression, right? Even just coming from Nigeria, I have that intergenerational trauma of colonization. And spirituality has been a thing that has gotten us through. Knowing that our ancestors are looking out for us has been very important on our journeys. And then in my research, this shows up as when I talk about people's experiences, I try not to talk about them as subjects, not as participants, but as humans whose knowledge or whose lived experiences are just inherently valuable by virtue of existing, right? And a lot of my work tends to talk about how you can use spirituality as the main source of healing in the therapeutic relationship. The relationship that you build with a client is, to me, a form of spirituality, because I believe all beings are spiritual and have an innate healing power to them. And so that shows up in my research and in my clinical work. So, sorry, excuse me, I just wanted to pull up my notes. I'm currently working on a study that's actually being funded by the Interfaith Youth Corps, and it's on how you can heal, how spirituality can moderate the relationship between vicarious racism and trauma symptoms. I think a lot of times when you hear trauma, you think of PTSD, you think of people who have been to war, have had like significant events that aversive events. But we're starting to realize the research is moving towards experiencing racism is a form of trauma. And it's interesting because it's a chronic trauma and people don't view it as that. It's an ongoing trauma every day. You can't escape it. So how do we help people cope? How do people remain resilient, even in the face of constant oppression, constant dehumanization? And so my work really focuses and centers on how spirituality has really served as that driving force and that protective force for marginalized communities. So I urge you all to really step outside of your comfort zone. Even though I grew up in Nigeria, I didn't really have an understanding very much of ancestral ways of healing and African ways of healing. But through my work in clinical practice, I have really learned the value that's in there. Even just things like going out into the wild or going outside and putting your feet in the grass. The very, very simple things in life that we take for granted. For some people, that's their spiritual practice, and really valuing that for what it is, especially our indigenous people too in America, whose land that we live on. And given that this past week was Indigenous Peoples Week, I just want to really acknowledge that we are living on stolen land and recognize that. And so that's my own little story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen and Camille and Darius. You've all just given us these gifts of these powerful stories and reflections, and of the ways that dialogue and appreciative knowledge has really shaped our lives and opportunities. And so again, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. I am aware of the time. And so, and I know that all of our Zoom small breakout room moderators are waiting for us. So I'm going to just give a couple of instructions here and a few words to bring this part to an end. And the presenters, if you look in the chat, you can see there's love coming your way. I do want to let you know of an upcoming event in just a few weeks that the Institute for Religion, Education, and Public Policy is hosting. It's on Thursday, November 5th from 4 to 5:30 p.m. I will make sure that you have a link to it in a follow-up email. It's called Spiritual Protest, the Role of Faith in the Fight for Racial Justice. So just be on the lookout for that link in a follow-up email. But of course, the links to our breakout sessions are in the chat now. And I'm just going to say a few closing words, and then feel free to click on the Zoom link for the one that you registered for. And our moderators are waiting and for you to read text together, to have conversation, to bring this afternoon to its fruition. So in closing here, with some prayerful words adapted from Unitarian Universalist minister Greta Cosby. Honoring the diversity of our spiritual heritages and the unity of our human condition, I invite you silently to call upon what is highest and deepest by the name you hold sacred and dear. Spirit of life and love, mover of the compassionate heart and human mind, melder of community, be present to us this afternoon as we are present to one another on our journey toward greater understanding and greater service. May you open our eyes to ever greater appreciation of the beautiful, the admirable, and life-giving in its many manifestations. Be well and enjoy your small group conversations.